Think of it as on top you've got physical reality. Okay, this for the classical economist was everything. Everything depends on physical reality. At the bottom you've got consumer preferences. These are subjective, these are objective. Okay? Objective, subjective. Right? Consumer preferences are subjective. Whether you like vanilla or whether you like chocolate, that's subjective. Okay? Whether the temperature is 90 degrees or 120 degrees or 30 degrees, that's objective. Okay? Now, in an economy, the consumer's desires have to be satisfied by products that are produced from physical reality. If it's ice cream you want to eat, it has to be produced from physical reality. You need cows, you need sugar cane, okay, to produce ice cream, okay? If it's food, if it's clothing, if it's housing, if it's transportation, it's all produced from physical reality, okay? So in an economy, in a market economy, you've got producers. And putting things in the starkest simplicity, producers buy resources and they sell consumer goods. Okay? I've telescoped the entire economy into its simplest structural form. Okay? You buy resources and you transform them into consumer goods. You buy land, labor, and translate that into bread for consumers. Okay? So you've got producers who take physical inputs and translate them into the satisfaction of consumer desires. There is no question about it that the chain of cause and effect, this is the cause and this is the effect. The bread that you eat was caused by physical reality. How did the bread come? Well, the bread came because there were people who scratched the earth. They had earth, you had people scratching the earth, you had ovens, you had people baking, and you got bread. The chain of causation is a one-way causation from physical reality to satisfaction of consumer demands. No question about it. Menger, and let me point out that from the classical point of view, it is this direction, this unidirectional chain of cause and effect, which determines all economic variables. The price of land, the price of labor, the price of bread, everything is determined by this unidirectional set of causes and effects. Costs determine values. Value is determined by costs, okay? Because look, that's the way it goes. Menger glimpsed a fundamental truth, a revolutionary truth that is exactly the opposite. That the economic chain of cause and effect is exactly the opposite, from the consumer all the way up to here. Now you may say, but this is absurd. The consumer who wants bread does not create land. He does not create labor that scratches the land. He does not create the plows that plow the land. He does not create the oxen that pull the plows that plow the land. True. Of course not. Of course not. But what Menger glimpsed was that everything we know in the world is determined by the fact that consumers have preferences. Because they have preferences, therefore they are purposefully pursuing those objectives which they have. And people have different purposes. And because people have different purposes, this translates itself into market prices which are determined entirely by consumer preferences against the background, the passive background of physical reality. I sometimes put it this way. To get the Mengerian glimpse, this is a box. It's a treasure box. If I was a better artist, I'd make it more realistic. But that's a treasure box. That's the best I can do. Okay? This is a treasure box. It's got, oh, what should I say? How many? I used to say $1 million. That was a long, long time ago. Right? Okay? $1 trillion. Let's be. Okay, $1 trillion in that box. It's an important box, even today. A trillion. What's a trillion here and a trillion there? You've got real money before, right? So there's $1 trillion in that box. But the box is a very strong box. And there's only one key in the whole world to that box. And I've got it. I've got that key. Okay? Without that key, nobody can open that box. How much is that key worth? How much is that key worth?
How easy is it to get the box?
What? Well, if somebody offered $1 million, you'd outbid him, right? You'd outbid him. You'd give him $1 billion, right? Because look, you'd get then all the difference between $1 trillion and $1 billion. I don't know what that is. I stopped counting. I can only count 3 zeros, right? But if somebody offers $1 billion, somebody else is going to offer $2 billion, $3 billion, $4 billion, right? The price is going to go up all the way till how much? Till $1 trillion minus a penny, I guess. Or whatever the minimum amount is that makes a difference. Okay. The value, what determines the value of the key? This is the key. This is the key. Okay? That's the key. What's the value of that key? What determines the value of that key? The cost of production of the key? Nah. What determines the value of the key? The value of the key is determined by the usefulness of that key. To whom? To people who would be able to use it to produce what they want. If you want $1 trillion, then that will attribute value to the key. That's the Austrian insight. That's not quite the same insight as Böhm-Bawerk and Wiese expounded in their subjective theory of value. It's a more fundamental insight into the role of subjectivism. The cause and effect, the cause and effect is exactly the opposite. Nobody's denying that from a physical point of view, this is the engineering chain of cause and effect. But the economic chain of cause and effect, what determines values, what determines how much land is going to be used, what determines the price of land, what determines the price of labor, what determines, right? That's determined by consumer preferences. Just as the value of the key is determined not by the cost of production of the key, it's irrelevant. Cost of production is irrelevant. Irrelevant. What determines values and not just values, I want to emphasize this, it goes far beyond the theory of value. What Menge had glimpsed was an understanding of how the economy works. The economy works because consumers want things. And because they want things, therefore they act. They act, they choose, they bid. And if a smart businessman knows that consumers are bidding, that smart businessman may realize that he can make a profit by satisfying those bids, by satisfying those demands. By doing so, he is acting as the agent, as it were, of the consumers by directing the resources into those channels which most successfully satisfy the desires of the consumers. And because in a free economy, entrepreneurs are free to do that, therefore they are free to organize the entire mass of transactions that makes up an economic system. They are free to organize them in a way which is governed by, very important phrase, consumer sovereignty. Consumer sovereignty. It is the sovereignty of the consumer which governs everything. Everything here is determined by the consumer. Obviously, the consumer sovereignty on the moon's surface will be different than consumer sovereignty on the sun's surface and different than consumer sovereignty on the earth, on the surface of this earth. But it's the consumer sovereignty, it's the consumer desires which call the shots. It's the consumer desires which determine what will actually happen.